Today I'm going to show you an easy way to get started in infrared photography without spending a lot of money. And I'll be doing it on my Olympus EM10 Mark II with the kit lens, but really any Olympus camera, the OMDs and the pens, you should be able to do the same things, as well as almost any camera for that matter. So you may have already seen some infrared photography online, and a lot of times they use dedicated cameras. Either they sent their cameras in and had them converted for infrared, or they bought a dedicated infrared camera, and those are very expensive options. And if you have your camera converted, it's pretty much useless for regular photography at that point. But if you just buy one of these little filters, and I paid like $13 for this one, you can get started doing infrared photography. And if you really want to get serious about it, then you may want to think about those other options. But I think for most of us, this is good enough. So if you're going to do infrared photography this way, you run into a few challenges. One is your image is going to be very dark, so you're forced to use very long exposures. And that's going to mandate using a tripod, because your exposures are going to be 3 seconds, 5 seconds, 20 seconds, whatever, depending on the light. But it's going to be difficult to walk around handheld doing infrared photography. Now, I did go out, one morning when I was walking my dog, and I did do some handheld shots with infrared photography, but I had to be at like ISO 6400 to get shutter speeds of 1/30th or 1/60th of a second in very bright daylight. So the pictures were very grainy, and some of them came out okay. You can do it. But it's not ideal. The best way is to be on a tripod with the longer exposures and shooting at ISO 200, because even at ISO 200 I found the pictures had some grain in them because there just isn't much light coming into the camera. These things cut out roughly 10 stops of light. And then the other challenge is the pictures are going to be very, very red with the default settings. So I'm going to show you a few settings we can change to kind of help us with that. But you're going to also need to do some post-processing, which I'll do towards the end of the video. Now let's go through the settings on the camera. And as always, I like to just do a full factory reset, like so. And that way we're all on the same page. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go into the Super Control panel, and I'm going to lower this to ISO 200 instead of auto ISO. And I'm also going to change the white balance to custom white balance, and I'm going to roll this down to 2000. And that's going to help you to compose the picture a little better and see the different colors, rather than getting an all red picture when you have the infrared filter on. When you lower the white balance down to 2000, it'll take a lot of the red out, so you can actually see the infrared colors, so to speak. And here's a couple of examples of the before and after of how that looks. Some people, they like to actually change their live view to show monochrome. If you want to do, black and white infrared photography. But if you're still capturing the raw image, you can always go back and do the infrared color photography. But I found that setting the custom white balance to 2000, you can get a pretty good representation of what the final image will look like before you do any special processing. And then I'm going to pick a single point on the focus, like so, and I'm going to use a 2-second timer on the shutter, but we're going to do it in anti-shock, so I have a 2-second anti-shock timer. And then I'm going to change this to large, fine, plus raw, like so. Now some people, as a practice, they like to turn the image stabilization off when you're on the tripod, and that's not a bad practice, so we'll do that. Personally, I haven't found much difference between on or off, so if you forget to do that, it's no big deal. And then the last thing here is I want to make sure the function 1 button is set to AEL AFL, because we're going to put the assign this to be the focus button, or it's better known as back button focus. But we're going to program the focus to the function 1 button. So we need to go back into the menu, and it's right here. It's the first thing in the custom menu, the AFMF. And we'll go to AEL AFL, single point autofocus. And we're going to change that to mode 3 so that the AEL, as you see at the bottom, AEL AFL is single point autofocus. So what we've done now, we've assigned the function 1 button on the back of the camera to become the focus button. So now when you half press the shutter button, it's not going to try and refocus. And generally it's a good practice, or it's just a lot easier for me to use back button focus if I'm going to be on a tripod. And for long exposure photography, which is generally all infrared photography, it's easier to use back button focus as well. Because sometimes the focus point is just off a little bit and it's not picking up enough contrast to be able to focus, especially through an infrared filter. So you may want to move the focus point just a little bit to focus on a point that has a little more contrast, and then hit the back button focus or the function 1 button to acquire the focus. And then once you've acquired the focus, you can just go ahead and push the shutter button from there. All right, now let's go back out and see what else we need to do here. Okay, now display, I'm going to go down here to Live View Boost. And I'm going to turn everything on to on 2. That way, when I'm out taking pictures and I want to try different modes, maybe a bulb mode, or maybe manual mode, or aperture priority, which is what I'm doing today, I'll be able to see everything on the screen. Because what Live View Boost does, if you don't know, it brightens up the screen so you can see almost in the dark. And like I said, when you put this infrared filter on it, the live view gets so dark it's hard to see anything, so turning Live View Boost on brightens up the image so you can better compose the picture. All right, let's see what else we got here. Let's go back out, go into exposure, and I'm going to turn noise reduction from auto back to on, because I found that noise reduction reduces a lot of the grain and color noise that you get with long exposure photography. And I've tried it on and off at different intervals, and in every case it was better. You got a better image with the noise reduction on. But that's different from the noise filter, and I'm going to turn that to low. And that's because that's strictly for your JPEG images. The noise reduction is for RAW and JPEG. The noise filter is for JPEGs only. All right, let's see what else we got. Okay, let's go into menu G, and I'm going to set the image quality here, everything to super fine, just out of habit. So that way, if we do want to use the JPEG image that we took, it'll be in the highest quality possible that the camera's capable of. All right, let's go back into the menu. There's one last thing I want to do, and I believe it's here in E. Exposure, ISO. For the bulb time monitor, I like to just put this up to 0. Sometimes I put it up to +5, because we will be shooting outdoors, and if I decide to do a bulb mode, it'll be bright enough so I can see it. The idea of having it default to -7 is to try to save some battery life, but for me personally, I like to see the screen and compose even when I'm in bulb mode. It's just too dark when you're outside otherwise, especially again with the infrared filter. All right, so let's go over to the computer now, and I'll narrate a little bit some of the footage I took while I was doing some infrared photography, and then I'll show you some of my post-processing tricks. So I just set up the camera exactly like we talked about, and then I put the red filter on, and then I started to compose the shot, but I didn't like this location, so I just moved over and just turned the camera around and pointed at the street. Did my back button focus. Here's the 2-second delay. Now it's taking the exposure, then it will do the noise reduction. and then we'll get the final images. All right, so looking at these 4 pictures, the first one here is just a straight out of camera JPEG without any infrared filter. And then the next one is if we just add the red filter, infrared filter, this is the kind of image we would get, just basically all red. But then if we look over here by adjusting the custom white balance to 2000, we see a little better separation of the colors and the sky and the tree, etc. And then over here, if we just convert it to black and white, or we took this picture in monotone, this is the image we would get. And that's really all you can do if you were using the in-camera settings and/or did this in Olympus Workspace. So things get a lot more interesting when you can use Lightroom and Photoshop. And this is the straight out of camera JPEG. However, if you look at the raw file that it came in, look how much richer the colors are. And this is something we can really work with in Lightroom and Photoshop. And I could do a couple of things here. If I went to develop this, for example, I could reset the white balance so that it's a little more interesting this way. I could even adjust some of the white balance this way so the skies are even more red and the trees are more green. But I think, let me set the white balance back to this cloud. But if we take this into Photoshop, we can do something called channel mixing, and we'll swap the red and blue channels. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to right click this, add it in Photoshop like this. And we're going to add simply a adjustment layer here called a channel mixer. And with this, we can swap the red and blue channels. So right now we're on the red or on the blue channel. So let's go ahead and add the red back into the blue channel and then take the blue out. So we're at 100% red, 0% blue. And then we have to change the red channel. And let's take out all of the red, put that to 0, put all of the blues to 100. And now we're a lot closer to what I was going for, the look. And we don't need to do anything with the green channel. You can see if I add or subtract, I really don't like what the green channel is doing anyway. So let's go ahead and exit this and save it. And then we'll come back to Lightroom. Now, here's the Photoshop edited image with the blue and red channel swapped. So what I'll do here is I'll do a white balance adjustment again. And now the blue sky is a little bit off, so all I have to do here is go down to the hue, pick my dropper, and adjust the blue until it starts looking a little bit more like the blue sky that we all know and love. So as you can see, you can get a lot of different looks out of the same scene using infrared photography. I mean, what would be a relatively mundane scene can be a lot more interesting in monochrome infrared and in color infrared. And if you have the Photoshop Lightroom set up, you can do this channel mixing, which gave us this image here. Now in my next tutorial, I'm going to be combining infrared photography together with some long exposure photography. And some of you may have already seen a few of these pictures on my Instagram.